You think he'd say?
Another day on the job,
I think my
guys.
grandfather in these 100 years has seen
have
the
a
most
long
remarkable
drive.
transformation of our country that you could imagine for the better. Right? I mean, he grew up in a segregated South that has been transformed into a place where, people participate and lead multiracial coalitions. We've seen so many of those issues come forward. We've transformed the healthcare of our people. We've changed the world in so many ways. I think the progress of this globe and of this country during my grandfather's life is something that he marvels at. And I think if the rest of us really look at it, we'd all marvel at it.
Jason Carter, it's a real pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much.
Likewise, thank you so much.
Jimmy Carter's grandson spoke with us in September. Jason also talked of his grandfather's life as a writer, and you can find that conversation at npr.org. This is NPR News.
We're in the final days of the year-end fundraiser, and there's still time to give. A huge thanks to everyone who has already donated. When you give today, we have great ways to thank you, and we suggest you shop our donor favorites, like the AJC digital subscription and the Nowhere Like Here mug. Consider an additional gift or an upgrade to your existing monthly donation by a few extra dollars. It'll really have an impact. Do it now at wabe.org/donate.
Hollywood strikes meant box office numbers were down for 2024, but there was still plenty of good stuff for moviegoers to enjoy. We count down the best films of the year on All Things Considered from NPR News. This afternoon at 4 on WABE.
Still to come this morning, more about Atlanta's famed New Year's Eve peach drop, which is making a return this year. Melissa Fado reports. But first, news from the BBC.
Good morning, I'm Rue Abbas at the BBC. South Korea's begun a week of national mourning after 179 people were confirmed killed in yesterday's plane crash. The Transport Minister, Yoo Kyung-suk, said investigators are looking at why the landing gear was not deployed.
When the landing gear malfunctions, there are ways to deploy it, either automatically or manually. The reasons for the malfunction will be identified through analysis of the flight recorder.
Elsewhere, the World Health Organization is urging Israel to stop attacking Gaza's hospitals and is calling for the release of the director of one, Dr. Hussam Abu Safia. Israel says Gaza's hospitals are being used as Hamas command centers. The BBC's Lipika Pelham.
The WHO said it was appalled by the raid on the Kamal Adwan hospital. Palestinian health officials said simultaneous Israeli airstrikes targeting the area around the hospital on Friday killed about 50 people, including medical staff.
And tributes continue to be paid to Jimmy Carter, among them former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown.
I think the secret of his success was when you met him, he treated everyone. He treated everyone equally. He was subservient to no one, and he was condescending to no one. And I think that's why he became so admired and was called on in every part of the world to be a negotiator for peace. That's why he won the Nobel Peace Prize, and also to defend and advance human rights.
I'm Rue Abbas at the BBC in London.
Support for NPR comes from the station and from the Wallace Foundation, working to develop and share practices that can improve learning and enrichment for young people and the vitality of the arts for everyone. Ideas and information at wallacefoundation.org. From Jarl and Pamela Moe, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts. And from the William T. Grant Foundation, supporting research to improve the lives of young people at wtgrantfdn.org.
Atlanta's famed New Year's Eve peach drop is back on this year's after a hiatus in 2023 on the calendar, rather. WABE's Melissa Fado talked with one of the organizers of the event, Underground Atlanta owner Shanil Leilani, CEO of Leilani Ventures. And she began by asking him about what it takes to bring the event back.
A big scale event like this, right, there's so many moving parts, and we really have to make sure that all those, boxes are, checking before we can do such a big scale event. And unfortunately last year, we couldn't do it. This year, we were planning, I would say, for the most of the year, We want to make sure that we are covering all of our grounds, making sure this is a fun, exciting, safe event.
What brought it back this year?
So this is like a public-private partnership event where we are partnering with city, county, state. So everybody has to give the support and financial support that this scale event needs. Last year the budget wasn't there. This year, we made sure we partnered with the city to make sure that that's not an issue. But yeah, so that's what's bringing it back this year.
So what can people expect this year? Is there anything new or different?
What's going to be really different about this year is the actual underground is going to be open. So we are encouraging people that whoever is coming out to attend the Peach Drop, we're encouraging them to visit the underground after that, right? Go to Lower Alabama streets where all the tenants are. We are currently a little over 70% occupied, and this year, we brought over 1 million people on the property. We are asking people, encouraging them to hang on and then visit our property and enjoy, go back down the memory lane, right? A lot of people have history, a lot of people have connection to this property.
And is this a free event, or do people need to reserve tickets or entrance in it in any way?
This is a completely free event.
Do you have any safety precautions or other tips for people who might want to come out on New Year's Eve?
Yeah, sure. Safety is obviously our biggest priority. There's always metal detectors, starting way far out, from the event that you walk in, you go through metal detectors, you got APDs on site, you got, sheriffs, you got, Fulton County officers, state patrols, officers that are, not on duty. Then you have our own, security team for the underground. So security is a top priority. And that's been always the first thing. We want to make sure that this is going to be a safe event. And we want to encourage people to come, not just people from the city. People should come out from throughout the state, throughout the Southeast. This is one of the largest events in the Southeast.
There's so many ways to spend New Year's Eve, including at home where it's warm. What makes this event special of everything going on that night?
We want this event to be for everybody. So we want people to bring their kids. This is event that a 5-year-old to a 70-year-old can really enjoy. It's not really focused towards one age group or one ethnicity or one genre. This is for everybody.
So that being said, with the ringing in of the new year, what's next and what's new for Underground Atlanta in 2025?
Yeah, there's other exciting things that we have planned for next year as well. Obviously, we are preparing for the World Cup in 2026. So hosting an event like this caliber that we're going to have, close to 70,000 or more people on the property, that really shows that Underground is really ready and prepared, to hold these caliber, these large-scale events for any event, right? Not just in 2025, but mainly for the World Cup. That during the World Cup, right? It's a 40-day event that we're going to welcome the entire world. So next year, we are planning to open, I would say, at least 6 more, spaces on the property. But ultimately, our goal is to have people living on the property. Our vision is to go vertical, but until that's happened, we are trying to open, these spaces back and trying something that's unique, something that's that not like traditional real estate owner, a landlord would do or would welcome. And that's been the key to success for us.
That was Shanil Walani of Walani Ventures. Thank you, Shanil.
Thank you.
And that was Melissa Fado. Amplifying Atlanta, this is listener-funded WABE. Still to come this morning, all the day's business news and the Marketplace Morning Report. That's less than a minute away.
Local support for Marketplace comes from Emory University's Goizueta Business School, the top-ranked driving force for change. Emory's MBA and specialized master's programs in management, finance, and business analytics can create new career opportunities. More at emory.biz/change.
the co-host of Alt Latino, will join us to share some of their favorite songs of the year, including this one by Portuguese jazz singer Carmen Souza. That's next time on Here and Now, this afternoon at 3 on WABE.
Let's update one of the biggest telecom hacks ever.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Bitwarden Password Manager, designed to secure logins from any location on any device over the holidays. Available at bitwarden.com.
I'm David Brancaccio in New York. The major mobile phone companies say their networks are secure now and clear from a Chinese hack nicknamed Salt Typhoon. But the U.S. government is still urging highly targeted individuals, they're calling them, to use encrypted messaging. Marketplace's Nancy Marshall-Genzer has the latest.
The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, says people who are in senior government or senior political positions should assume that all communications on their mobile devices are at risk of interception or manipulation. CISA wants them to use end-to-end encrypted communications like Signal that have features like disappearing messages and images. The warning comes after federal officials said at least 8 telecom companies in the U.S. were hit by the Salt Typhoon hack run out of China. Beijing denies this. AT&T issued a statement saying China targeted a small number of individuals of foreign intelligence interest, but that, quote, we detect no activity by nation-state actors in our networks at this time. Verizon says a small number of high-profile customers in government and politics were specifically targeted, but says it's now contained the cyber incident. I'm Nancy Marshall-Genzer for Marketplace.
On this last Monday of the year, let's check in with economist Julia Coronado. She's founder of Macro Policy Perspectives in Austin. Good morning.
Good morning.
'Tis the time of year where we make bold pronouncements about the year gone by and the year ahead. Sounds like you're not in the mood.
I like to avoid doing that at this time of year. Traders go home, markets are thin. The signals that we're getting right now are of very low quality. There's so much uncertainty. I prefer to wait until we have January under our belts to really form a view of what's in store for the year ahead. And of course, we have a change in administration, which makes things extraordinarily uncertain right now. So we really do need to wait till the end of January.
But all that said, the S&P 500 index would have to fall 26% today and tomorrow to erase its gains of the year. It's been a pretty good ride.
It's been an extraordinary year for the U.S. economy all around. We brought inflation down. The job market has stayed strong. It really has been a pretty good year, despite the bad publicity it gets. The U.S. economy has really had quite a run.
The economy needs a press agent. That's an interesting concept. Economist Julia Coronado is also a professor at the University of Texas, Austin. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Might need a press agent for the stock market today. Let's do the numbers. Downbeat start. The Dow is down 621 points, 1.5%. The S&P also down 1.5%. The Nasdaq down 1.6% as more air comes out of technology stocks. Some minor relief with interest rates this morning. With the bond market up, the benchmark 10-year rate is down at 4.55%. Now to luxury Birkin bags and their knockouts. Earlier this fall, some presumably well-heeled consumers sued the fashion house Hermès, saying it's unfair that they thought they had to buy quite a bit of other Hermès stuff before they had the right to pay to buy a coveted Birkin bag. The judge at the time seemed skeptical of the challenge. The legit bags go for $11,000, $18,000, $55,000 when rendered in poor as crocodile. Meanwhile, over at Walmart, a Birkin-esque handbag is currently selling briskly for under $100. Walmart, not Hermès.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Schwab, helping people invest in ideas they believe in with Schwab investing themes, with more than 40 themes to choose from. More at schwab.com.
2024 was the year commercial-scale deep-sea mining began. Norway got in first, the process of removing rock-like nodules from the ocean floor packed with useful minerals. But just last week, the government in Oslo suspended the plan amid environmental concerns. On the other side of the world, the tiny Pacific island nation of the Cook Islands is also looking at deep-sea mining. The BBC's Katie Watson reports.
Low-lying Pacific islands are among the nations most vulnerable to climate change. With rising sea levels, the ocean remains their greatest threat, but it's also their greatest provider. They fish in it, they live off tourists drawn to their turquoise waters. Now the Cook Islands wants to dig deeper, to the ocean floor, where there are millions of rocks or nodules packed full of some of the most in-demand resources in the world: cobalt, manganese and nickel, crucial elements in things like electric car batteries and mobile phones. The Prime Minister Mark Brown is leading the Cook Islands push to mine the ocean. Such is life on a small island, he wears more than one hat. He's the Tourism Minister and the Seabed Minerals Minister too.
They present a huge potential for our country. Countries like us, at the forefront of impacts of climate change, are struggling to find ways to build resilience.
You think you're finding a way forward that's different, but yet people are saying this is risky, you shouldn't do it.
Our Seabed Minerals provides an opportunity for us to be able to look at how we can potentially exploit this resource.
It's a hot and sunny day here on Rarotonga, and we've come to the main port on the island. And we've boarded the Anuanua Moana, which is the research ship owned by Moana Minerals. South African Hans Smit is the CEO of Moana Minerals, which has an exploration license in the Cook Islands.
We have a couple of ways of sampling nodules. The first one is, the best way to explain it is a cookie cutter. You've got dough, and you press a cookie cutter into it and you lift it up. And what's really important about that is it's undisturbed.
The worry, though, is that if they start mining, this untouched area of the ocean will be disturbed.
It's easy to get caught in the negatives. And it's not that I'm saying don't pay attention to the negatives. What I'm saying is don't use a very small amount of negative and close your mind to everything. Nothing we do in life is risk-free. So if we want to have this lifestyle, we want our cell phones and we want our electric vehicles and the like, we need the metals.
The Cook Islands sees deep-sea mining as giving this nation some security in an uncertain future. Future income that will give its people better healthcare, education and opportunity. The downside, though, isn't yet clear. Internationally, there's a growing call for a halt on deep-sea mining while more research is done. And this island is split. I'm the BBC's Katie Watson for Marketplace.
More from APM, American Public Media.
On the next closer look, he was considered a political unknown when he ran for president of the United States. While campaigning, Jimmy Carter said he wanted voters to know his character.
My strengths and my weaknesses, I stand on the issues. If I can measure up to what the American people want our government to be, I'll be elected.
From Plains, Georgia to the White House, Jimmy Carter's legacy beyond the Oval Office. Today at noon.
I want to thank you so much for joining us for Morning Edition on WABE. Still to come this morning, the AJC's Politically Georgia. That's next at 10 a.m. This is member funded, WABE 90.1 FM and HD1 Atlanta. Streaming on the WABE app on your smart speaker and at WABE.org.
From the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, I'm Greg Bluestein. It's a special edition of Politically Georgia, Jimmy Carter, Georgia Roots, Global Legacy.
His lesson for us, at least, is that he has had a long time and he's used every minute of it to do the best that he could.
I'm Patricia Murphy. We'll spend the next hour reflecting on the life of former President Jimmy Carter, starting with his humble beginnings in Plains, where he met his lifelong partner, Rosalind Carter.
And I'm Tia Mitchell. We'll take you from his time in the Navy to his time as Georgia governor, all the way to his time in the White House.
I'm Bill Nigut. After a one-term presidency during which Carter accomplished much more than many people recognize, he carved out an even greater Act 3, dedicating 4 decades to public health, diplomacy, and other important works at the Carter Center.
First, the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. President Biden has declared January 9th as a day of national mourning for former President Jimmy Carter. He died yesterday at the age of 100. He'd been in hospice care for more than a year. Carter served as the nation's 39th president for one term, winning election in 1976. Despite notable accomplishments, he was voted out of office with anger over soaring inflation and the Iran hostage crisis. NPR's Stephen Fowler says that Carter drew acclaim for work after he left the White House.
His signature work with the eponymous Carter Center, along with his late wife Rosalind, vowed to, quote, wage peace through work on democracy, global health, human rights, including effectively eradicating this parasitic disease, the guinea worm in Africa. He was also awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
NPR's Stephen Fowler reporting. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in the hospital recovering from what doctors say was a successful surgery to remove his prostate. His hospitalization comes at a critical time. NPR's Carrie Kahn reports Netanyahu is standing trial for alleged corruption, and Israel is fighting wars on multiple fronts.
Doctors say Netanyahu's surgery went well and that, quote, there was no fear of cancer or malignancy. They added that, quote, we only hope for the best. The Prime Minister's office said Netanyahu was fully conscious and is recuperating in a bomb-proof underground recovery unit. Netanyahu is expected to remain in the hospital for several days. Judges in his trial on corruption charges granted Netanyahu a 3-day recess. At 75, he is one of the world's oldest leaders today. He has had health issues before, including a heart condition. Critics in Israel say they're concerned about his health as he deals with the war in Gaza, active troops in Lebanon and Syria, and battles with Houthi rebels in Yemen. Carrie Kahn, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
The World Meteorological Organization warns this year's record-breaking heat is likely to continue next year. It'll speed up climate change. Lisa Schlein reports from Geneva. The WMO is calling for urgent action.
WMO reports 2024 is set to be the warmest year on record. The United Nations Weather Agency says climate change has increased the number and impact of extreme weather events in all regions of the world. That included Hurricane Helene, which hit Florida, causing widespread flooding and wind damage. Historic flooding across West and Central Africa killed more than 1,500 people. Raging wildfires and severe drought have caused irreparable suffering and huge economic losses to countless millions. WMO is urging nations to slash the use of fossil fuel and promote renewable energy. For NPR News, I'm Lisa Schlein in Geneva.
Stocks are falling on Wall Street. The Dow is down 685 points. The NASDAQ is down 350. This is NPR. In South Korea, investigators are trying to discover what caused yesterday's plane crash south of Seoul. 179 people were killed when the jet landed at the airport. The plane's landing gear was not deployed. It exploded after it crashed into a concrete barrier. Officials say they've recovered the plane's flight data recorders. The passenger jet was a Boeing 737-800 model. South Korean authorities will inspect all of these Boeing models now in service with the country's airlines. A new study looks at the effects of artificial light at night on coral reefs. NPR's Jonathan Lambert explains.
Coral reefs exposed to artificial light at night are a lot more active, according to research published in the journal Global Change Biology. Artificial light attracts more predatory fish and keeps daytime fish that would otherwise be asleep up and foraging for food. This could lead to less productive reefs over time. But the researchers say that simple actions, like turning off unnecessary lights or using motion detectors, can help preserve these ecosystems. Jonathan Lambert, NPR News.
Award-winning actress Linda Lavin has died of complications from recently discovered lung cancer, according to her representative. She was 87 years old. Lavin won a Tony Award for the play Broadway Bound. Later, she won 2 Golden Globes. Those were some of her most beloved work. She played the title character on the TV show Alice. Launched in 1976, it featured a widowed woman who raised a son and worked as a waitress in Phoenix. Funeral services for Lavin have not been announced. I'm Corfa Coleman, NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Lily Endowment, a private foundation supporting NPR's coverage of religion and spirituality, and Jarl and Pamela Moon, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts.
From the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, this is Politically Georgia. I'm Greg Bluestein with my AJC colleagues, Tia Mitchell, Bill Liggett, and Patricia Murphy. Today is a somber day across Georgia, the nation, and the world as former President Jimmy Carter has died. He entered hospice care in February of 2023 in his hometown of Plains. His partner and wife of 77 years, Rosalind, died in November of that year. Jimmy Carter turned 100 in October 2024, making him the longest living former president in U.S. history. Over this next hour, we'll begin unpacking that very long, well-lived life. But first, guys, Bill, I'm going to throw it to you. What are some of your memories of covering the former president over the last few decades?
Well, you know, I moved to Atlanta in 1983 and I felt so privileged that I got opportunities to meet, interview, talk with a former president of the United States, Jimmy Carter. And the first thing I will always, I think, remember about him is what many people say. He was an extraordinarily kind and humble man. I've told a story once before, but I'll do it again very quickly. We were doing an interview at one point at the Carter Center, a one-on-one interview. And when it was finished, Carter said to me, "Didn't I read somewhere that you have a son now?" And I said, "Yes, I do. He's about 3 years old." And Carter said, "Well, why haven't you ever brought him over here to have my picture made with him?" And I thought he was just being gratuitous, being nice. I got back to Channel 2 News. I got a phone call from his scheduler who said, "When can you bring your son over?" We took him over there. The Carters, both Rosalind and Jimmy, spent 45 minutes posing for pictures, and they're some of the most cherished pictures we have. He was that kind of person.
And Patricia, I know you've written, it seems like, more than a dozen columns about Jimmy Carter's life and his legacy over the years.
Yeah, and what you take away from writing all of that is what an incredible impact he and Rosalind Carter have had on so many people, and people you would never expect, people who he would not have he was a very important person, but he would often stop in airports to talk to people. He would write letters to the children of the men he served with on his Navy submarine when they died. And these are cherished prizes for these families, heirlooms that they will remember forever because of the small kindnesses, huge impacts. People at the General Assembly, for every birthday, it seems, dozens and dozens of members who you wouldn't think would have known Jimmy Carter professionally. He knew their family. He had a huge impact on the caregiving they were able to provide for their own family. They were inspired to work with Habitat. They were inspired to become public health experts. His impact on people well after his presidency inspires me so much, and it makes me ask myself every day, what could I do to have even a fraction of that kind of impact?
And Tia, you were among the lucky few that made the pilgrimage to Maranatha Baptist Church down in Plains to see the former president live in person give a Sunday school sermon.
Yeah, and when I moved to Atlanta, that was when the Carters were in their, I think, mid-90s at this point, and they were still building Habitat houses. And I was like, it introduced me to the mythology of Jimmy and Rosalind. And when the pandemic hit, I was writing a lot of articles about efforts to kind of better enshrine their homestead in Plains, and I decided to go down there just to see it for myself. And luckily they were at church, and yes, they had slowed down by then considerably, but they were there. Rosalind, when she found out I was with the AJC, she insisted on walking me to the front to, as she said, meet Jimmy. So I got to meet both of them that day. And even though President Carter shook my hand and then told me to go sit back down because it's time for Sunday school.
I was fortunate enough to, I probably interviewed the former president about a dozen times over the years, but my most memorable event with him was going to Haiti and the Dominican Republic with him around 2010, doing a fight to eradicate a horrible disease in their guinea worm. And what struck me, and we're going to talk about this in a bit, was just the love story. Seeing it up close and personal. You know, the love that he had for his bride, Rosalind, with whom he met
when she was an infant living right next door. And that love and that smile and that relationship just was so real, right? It was so personal. He told me the story, and I know he loves telling that story about the first time they went on a date. After one date, he goes back home and says to his mom, "I found my bride," and how she rejected him not long after that when he finally asked her to marry him. And Carter's telling she went on to date every eligible boy in the county, but finally Rosalind agreed to marry him, and that was the best moment in his life. Well, we can't talk about President Carter without exploring those Georgia beginnings in the close-knit town of Plains, where Jimmy Carter was born to his farmer parents, James and Lillian Carter, in 1924. In 1930, Jimmy Carter began attending Plains High School, where he would attend through grade 11. Here's what National Park Service Ranger Jennifer Hopkins said about Carter's humble beginnings to our producer, Natalie Mendenhall.
Right now we are in the historic classroom at Plains High School, and it's a classroom set up to be in 1930s, which is when President and Mrs. Carter attended Plains High School. They both learned in this very room. They went through grades 1 through 11 and graduated from here, so their legacy starts in the very room that we're sitting in.
After graduating from that quaint schoolhouse, Jimmy Carter's boyhood dream of being in the Navy became a reality as he was appointed to the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. He graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 1946.
I think from the U.S. Navy perspective, I think what we look at is President Carter, again, getting his start in the U.S. Navy, being able to go to the Naval Academy and to commission and to serve his country was just the beginning. That was just the beginning of such a tremendous life.
That was Navy Public Affairs Officer Dawn Stankus, and she's right. Former President Carter's story continued as he married his lifelong partner Rosalind in 1946. The pair welcomed 3 sons, Jack, Chip, and Jeff, and later daughter Amy. The family returned to Plains in the 1950s after the passing of Jimmy's father. Carter took over his father's peanut farm, and the Georgia Democrat go on to be elected to the Sumter County School Board and served 2 terms in the Georgia Senate. Carter made a bid for the Georgia governorship in 1966, but ultimately lost to Lester Maddox. And in the summer of 1970, Carter recruited Doc Paget to work on his gubernatorial campaign.
And just one day working in the yard, and I thought, what will I ever tell my grandchildren I have ever done with my life? I work out here and play in this dirt all the time. At that moment, car drove up to the curb and a young man stepped out, and it was Jimmy Carter. And it occurred to me, well, he has the characteristics of John Kennedy. I knew Jimmy. I had met him briefly, and also Charles Kerbo had suggested that Jimmy come by and speak to me. So he asked me to volunteer and help him in this race for governor. And I went to the headquarters. I was assigned to help Rosalind and Miss Lee, and that was the beginning of something that changed my life. And I didn't finish pulling up in the weeds for a long time.
Carter went on to win that second campaign for governor, and he surprised most of his Georgia supporters and attracted plenty of national attention during a 12-minute address in 1970 when he proclaimed that the time for segregation had ended.
At the end of a long campaign, I believe I know our people of this state as well as anyone could. Based on this knowledge of Georgia, north and south, rural and urban, liberal and conservative, I say to you quite frankly that the time for racial discrimination is over. Our people have already made this major and difficult decision, but we cannot underestimate the challenge of hundreds of minor decisions yet to be made. Our inherent human charity and our religious beliefs will be taxed to the limit. No poor, rural, weak, or black person should ever have to bear the additional burden of being deprived of the opportunity of an education, a job, or simple justice.
Bill, that was a shocking moment, to say the least, to many of his supporters who had no idea that was coming.
It made the front page of the New York Times the next day, the fact that a Southern governor would call for an end to racial discrimination. What a lot of people don't know is that there were legislators who were in the crowd at the inauguration, and when Carter made those remarks, any number of them turned their backs and walked out. So from the very beginning, he did something very bold, very courageous, and was viewed nationally, at least by the New York Times, as a leader of the new, what they called moderates in Southern government.
One of the things when I was out at Plains, kind of learning about Jimmy Carter's childhood home, is his anti-segregationist stances came from how he was raised. And we talk about this peanut farm that he was raised on, his father's farm. But the farm is really closer to Archery, Georgia than Plains. Plains is the nearest real town because Archery barely has a stop sign. But Archery is a black town in Georgia. So that farm was right on the edge of Archery, Georgia. And so all the black kids who grew up in Archery, Jimmy Carter played with them. He was not raised to consider himself above those kids. We also know that his father's right-hand man was a black man who lived on the farm. And that man and his wife helped raise Jimmy. He would spend nights at their house in their homestead. So I think it just taught him from an early age. He saw firsthand that the difference in skin color did not warrant a difference in treatment, and it really clearly had an impact on him through his political career.
That's such a great point, Tia. And to take it to the next step of his life, when he ran for school board in Sumter County and served on the school board, it was the school board for all of the schools, which at the time were segregated. So the black schools and the white schools. And he said the weight on his heart he had on him after driving and looking at everything that the white schools had, and then so little for the black schools, using the old textbooks that the white children had already used, having just the leftovers, having a fraction of the number of teachers, a fraction of the resources, and the results for the children were so obvious, the disparities from the earliest age on through high school. And so few black children finished school because they had to go and work on their families' properties as well. So he has said many times that both growing up, as he did, as you described it, with his closest friends, his community, they were black, but then also seeing the difference and seeing the different outcomes in the schools in Sumter County just put in his heart so strongly that it's something that he would address when he had the power to do it.
Bill, he also said about restructuring state government. He focused on reorganizing the state's budget. He sought to enhance the weakened education system and led to basically serve the roadmap to what eventually became the adoption of a statewide kindergarten program. He made progress toward the creation of a unified court system. In many ways, it was a preview of some of the things he would do in the White House.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Jimmy Carter always had a methodical brain. He thought about systems. He thought about ways in which systems could be better for the good of the institutions within the systems and also for the people. And you're right, he did that as governor and then certainly did a lot of that when he got to Washington in the White House.
Well, all that effort, all that work also got him all sorts of good national attention, because when then Governor Carter was making all this progress for Georgians, there was talk of him seeking an even higher office. Here's his longtime aide, Dot Padgett, again.
I was actually was a guest in the governor's mansion. I was going with Rosen to the trip to Brazil, and was in the guest room, and there was a guest book you could write in, and this was in 1973, and I wrote in the guest book, today the governor's mansion, tomorrow the White House. You could see the capabilities that the man had.
During the summer of 1974, then Governor Carter agreed to direct the Democratic National Committee's nationwide midterm campaign. The position allowed him to meet key state Democratic Party officials from all over the country. Then, in December of that year, Carter set his sights on the White House and announced his bid for the presidency. The Carter's niece, Leanne Smith, remembers her uncle announcing that he'd run for the nation's highest office in a rather casual way. Here's how she says Carter broke the news about his bid to his extended family.
I will tell you about a Thanksgiving that we had at my grandmother's house, and it was right after he was governor of Georgia. I was probably 7th grade, I guess, because the inauguration was 8th grade, so it had to be a year and a half or so before that. We were all fixing our plates like we normally did. The plates were all scattered all over the table, and just as we were fixing them, he just said, "Oh, I need to tell y'all something." And we're like, "Well, what?" And he said, "I'm running for president." And my dad said, "Of what?" And he said, "Of the United States." And we all just kind of laughed and just went on about fixing our plate. So it was, things like that. It was just so, young and curious. You hate to say ordinary, but it was not like a big deal, I mean, we did get on the buses, or I did as an 8th grader or 7th grader, and go to Florida campaigning and things like that. But the things that time we spent with him were like normal family stuff.
So Carter began a grassroots campaign for the White House, but it was hard for him to distinguish himself on the national level in such a crowded primary. Still, he had some secret weapons that he mobilized, starting with the famous Peanut Brigade. The Peanut Brigade sent volunteers to knock on doors and hand out flyers all